In this new episode of the Dres Ring Space Station, we are gonna see the installation of a new module and the arrival of the first crew. Hello and welcome to my channel, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Pietro, and in this video we are gonna build the first crew ferry from Kerbin to the Dres Space Station inside of the rings of the planet that I started building in the previous episode. If you did not see that, go and check it out so that you're gonna understand where we are and why we are doing this. And let's get straight into the building of the ferry that's gonna carry the crew through interplanetary space from Kerbin to Dres. I decided to use the new 5-seated pod so that we can bring lots of kerbals along the way. I used a nuclear engine, so I put one of the big hydrogen tanks. I installed the launch escape system obviously on top because kerbal safety is one of the most important things for us in our space agency. Then I also installed a radioisotope thermoelectrical generator to electrically power our spacecraft, and then obviously built the fairing that uncovers the engine. In this situation I was not able of putting the engine at the top as I did for the other builds, therefore there is some instability. That's why I had to add those two struts there, which helped. The fairing didn't want to get itself closed, but trying again and clicking outside of it let me close it, and so then I could just check the staging, which this time was a complete mess since I built on top of the rocket and then all the stages were mixed up, and so it was kind of hard since I had all the parachutes, the drogue chutes, the decoupler to detach the launch escape tower at the top. That required some management to put everything in order. Here I'm setting up the action groups, so we want to have the launch escape system activate together with the decoupler of the capsule in the moment in which we press the abort button, which is at the left side of the screen. And also we want to be able to detach the launch escape tower from the rocket, activating it once we get in a safe phase of the flight by just pressing one button, and I like to set it on one of my keyboard. Now we are ready for launching the first crew to the Dres Ring Space Station, therefore let's line up the planets. We need to have Dres 86 degrees more or less in front of Kerbin at the moment of launch, and this is what I did here as you could see from the map view. And then just standard launch by not turning the rocket too early, so staying vertical, and then start tilting very slightly the rocket towards the east to make our gravity turn and enter in a prograde orbit around Kerbin. Very straightforward type of launch, because the most difficult maneuvers, which are the change of inclination and the actual setup of the encounter with Dres, are gonna happen later, but unluckily it was not so easy this time. The rocket went on a spin on its own without me being able to do anything. I discovered that tapping multiple times the abort button does shut off the engine of the launch escape system, which should be a solid rocket booster, and so it should not be able to shut off. And yeah, the first flight did not go as planned, therefore our kerbals made an unexpected test of the re-entry capabilities of the capsule. They tested the fact that the launch escape system more or less works. Now we know that we just need to click once and it's gonna activate, and after they'll splash down in the seas just to the east of the Kerbal Space Center. We can go again for the launch after having managed this weird tumbling that they had in the sea, and after putting a new fairing around the spacecraft to make the rocket more similar to what we had in the previous launches, so a little thicker at the top. That may help with the stability during the launch. Therefore you can see me here building the fairing around, again running into the problem of not being able to close it, but then simply grabbing a part and putting it away lets me close it, and so that's perfect for me. I had to manage the fairing, making sure that it was deploying when we were activating the launch escape system, and then also I painted it white just to make it a little prettier. There you saw me misclicking a little and painting white the stuff that was on the inside, which I really didn't want to do, but yeah, it happened. Then I tried to open the fairing, but the game did not let me see through it, and so I could not repaint back the stuff. I also made the fairing a 4-sided fairing remembering what happened in the last episode, in which a clamshell in just 2 different sides crashed back on the rocket after deployment, and therefore, well, yeah, you saw how it went. Like we did not complete the mission as we were supposed to do. But in any case, in the background you see the sped up footage of the launch. This time around I had a lower FPS count than usual, like the game was laggier. I had the clouds activated, even if in the settings I set everything to the minimum graphical settings, if not for the resolution, which I still play in 180 because in 720p the game looks very weird. I don't know why, but it was a little laggier than usual, but luckily enough I managed to get through. We can speed up the footage for the video, and there you go. Standard climb into orbit with a very late gravity turn, just to avoid the instabilities, which are even harder to fight with the low FPS rate that we have right now. And with this rocket, unfortunately, I waste a lot of delta V by going in a very high orbit around Kerbin. Obviously, the optimal way would be just circularizing just outside of the atmosphere at about 70 kilometers from the surface of Kerbin, because in that way you do not need, if you want to circularize, to raise your periapsis a lot on the other side of the planet. Obviously starting from a circular orbit while going interplanetary makes it easier for you, because in each part of the orbit you are at the same height. Therefore the orbit rises while you create a maneuver plan in an equilibrated way, no matter where we are and where we need to go with respect to interplanetary space. In this case we need to burn on the retrograde side of Kerbin, let's say on the opposite side with respect to where the velocity of Kerbin is going, because we're going to an outer planet. Therefore, if our orbit had the periapsis, the lowest point of the orbit, on the forward facing side, let's call it, of Kerbin, it would require way more delta V to rise it and to make it become the orbit that we wanted to get this intersection with Dres. Instead, if our orbit was with the periapsis or the apoapsis on some other side, it may be as well harder, since we will need to turn the orbit around. Here, by the way, you saw me going into the vehicle assembly building and then putting on the launch pad one single prop core with RTG that was to create a time warper. Why is that? Well, the time warp, even if we go in the tracking station, is blocked to the time warp available to our last used vehicle. Therefore, since my last used vehicle was in low Kerbin orbit, it did not have all the time warp available, and I launched in a transfer window which was not optimal. Apparently when I did the lineup of the planet I was a little bit too optimistic and the angle was lower than 86 degrees, therefore there was no way of me getting to Dres at the height of Dres and intersecting its orbit at the correct moment, if not by wasting lots and lots of fuel to slow down, let's say, my approach. Therefore I had to time warp until the next launch window with the kerbals that were there. Don't worry, like, the spacecraft is big, they had plenty of food for all that time, plenty of snacks. That's what kerbals like, from what we know. And then I could finally perform the maneuver. Here the rocket was spinning around. Again, we encountered this problem also the last episode. This particular engine with this particular craft file makes everything spin around if I am in the map view. Therefore I had to go into the normal view, so not staying in the map view, and I also used the time warp to stick the craft, because when you time warp, the only thing that works is the acceleration of the engine, like the physics of the spacecraft turning around do not act, luckily enough. Therefore I could time warp to stabilize it into a specific attitude, and from there accelerating until our orbit did not reach the height of Dres, and then setting up in the line of the nodes, so where the two planes in which we were orbiting and Dres is orbiting, setting up another maneuver plan to change the inclination and obtain, by tweaking a little bit around with prograde, retrograde, normal, anti-normal, radial in and radial out, the encounter with Dres, which we got there, and hopefully by performing this maneuver we are gonna obtain exactly how the maneuver planner promised us and get this close encounter, this entrance in the sphere of influence of Dres at the first try without need of any further adjustments. Well, obviously it was not like that. Actually, I had to make lots of more adjustments because this thing that while using the map view the rocket was spinning around if I was not time warping, therefore I had to time warp while staying in the map view to be able to see how my orbit was being modified. But then I had to throttle down as soon as I got into the correct orbit, so I had to slow the time warp, but slowing the time warp takes a little bit before it lets you act on the engine. It was a mess, but I managed to get to the end. So you see me here creating various maneuver plans here and there, trying again to get the two indications of the entrance inside of the sphere of influence as lined up as possible with the planet, let's say, being a diameter of the sphere of influence and not instead a simple segment intersecting it. Therefore it meant that my periapsis was quite close to the planet, which is what you can see here. And then obviously again fighting with the maneuver planner that allowed me to click on it only if on top of the screen somewhere around there and not where it was supposed to be. Here I'm setting up the maneuver to slow down and start the capture inside the sphere of influence while also trying to target the space station and therefore getting on an orbit with a similar inclination. This time I decided to perform the maneuver not from the map view but from the spacecraft view so that we could see how it was going on, also because we had to stage midway through the burn to switch to the nuclear engine. And well, did the maneuver turn out as it was promised? Spoiler alert, no. As soon as I'm gonna switch to the map view, you're gonna see that for some other non-well explicated reasons, we ended up on an orbit which was completely different from the one that the maneuver plan promised us. And so we had to create another maneuver plan, this time tweak it a little bit around even more and make sure that we were getting to an orbit with the lowest difference in inclination possible with respect to the Dres Ring Space Station, and also with a periapsis that was not too close to the planet, which unfortunately happened, so no problem, just point radial out, burn in that direction, time warp down. There we see them for the first time, some kerbals reached the rings of Dres. Actually, this was my first interplanetary flight with kerbals in Kerbal Space Program 2, so it's kind of an important milestone for me. And then yeah, more maneuvers to change the inclination to set up the periapsis to reach and to intersect the orbit of the space station. The procedure is practically the same as I used the last time to dock the two first modules together. So we are in an elliptical orbit that passes through the height of the target orbit, and from there we manage the height of the apoapsis so that at a certain point in one of our revolutions we are gonna be in an encounter with the target, which is what I'm doing here. With this maneuver we lower our orbit and then we can change again its inclination, put ourselves in the same plane as the target, and then once at the encounter that we are gonna get, create a maneuver plan there and see how much we need to change our orbit to make so that on the next encounter we are gonna have a relative distance from the target below ideally 2-3 kilometers and with a relative velocity of about, I don't know, 10-15 meters per second, even better if it is lower. Here in this moment you can see me having a skid issue. I panicked, I didn't know what was going on, I didn't understand why it was not getting the encounter that I was expecting. And the thing is that you need to place the maneuver plan just in front of your position at the next encounter so that it can show you what's gonna happen in the next orbit after that you perform the maneuver plan that you just planned. Therefore it's what I did here, and then I could do the burn and refine it with the reaction control thrusters. So using H, and then with the RCS activated you are gonna use your monopropellant with your RCS thrusters to accelerate or decelerate based on where you're pointing with your spacecraft, and that's what I did there to lower our encounter distance and the relative velocity. There I was just taking some cool screenshots of Dres in this situation, and here we are in the final approach at 3.5 kilometers away from the target with a relatively high relative velocity. That's because our orbit was a little bit bigger and significantly bigger than the target's one. Therefore here I had to make a few burns shooting out our hydrogen from the nuclear engine. And then once we got into the range of 200 meters with a slow velocity below 2 meters per second, proceeding with the approach to be safe, to avoid the risk of accidentally crashing into the space station. So yeah, very slowly and steadily bringing our spacecraft in, and what I wanted to do was docking in the docking port at the top of the spacecraft. Therefore I switched my camera view, I went into the chase, or I don't remember how it's called. There's two different cameras, there's the chase view and another one. Well, I use one of them to put myself in this orientation that aligns my commands of the reaction control system. So I, J, K and L are aligned with that camera position. Therefore it allows me to translate up, down with I and K, or left, right with J and L with the correct orientation. Otherwise with the celestial camera or with another camera, oh yeah, capture or chase, that's the name of the two cameras that we need to use in this situation. Well, with the other cameras instead, it's hard to understand where you are looking and which of the keys you need to use to properly move around the spacecraft. But still, here I had some skill issue. I wanna blame it on the game that was lagging and stuff like that, but instead I guess it was just simply me. Seriously, not having docking port alignment mod, which is what I was using in KSP1, which is also what you can see on the screens of spacecraft. For example, if you watch one of the Soyuz or Progress dockings, you are gonna see that clearly, that they have this indicator that tells them if they are aligned and where they are with respect to the docking port in a plane, not simply how it's there on KSP in the nav ball that shows you the relative position in space but doesn't tell you if you are aligned or not with the plane of the docking port. That really simplifies the job. But in any case, after some struggle, I managed to get in the correct orientation and inside of the docking range of the magical clamps of KSP that are like magnetic, or we don't really know how they work, the docking ports in this game. But yeah, we docked and then we could transfer the crew. We left Jebediah inside of the command pod because he's the commander, he's the pilot of the mission, and so he's gonna be the one that stays there like it's happening right now on the ISS with the Dragon commanders. And then I again had to perform some adjustments to the orbit using the reaction control thrusters to make sure that we are gonna stay, we are inside of the rings of Dres. And so as soon as my orbit started crossing the rings, going from the northern part to the southern part of them, I just thrusted upwards with my reaction control thruster to try and stay in a stable orbit inside of the rings. And so after this shot of the space station with its first crew, it's time to go back to the vehicle assembly building where we need to build another habitative module for the space station. Therefore, here you can see me putting together an hitchhiker's module and then some more small parts that are batteries, a decoupler, a pod, a command pod, an SAS module, again hydrogen because we love nuclear engines and that's what powers our spacecraft. Here some struggle with the vehicle assembly building editor, I don't know what was happening there, it didn't let me take away the part. And then yeah, this more or less is our module. I'm adding the reaction control thrusters right now, setting them at the height of the center of mass, strap on some RTGs, and then we are ready for launch. During the launch, the staging was all messed up, and while I was trying to adjust it during the proper launch, I noticed that my stack decoupler that is there, that I placed as the first part between the habitative module and the space stack, is not present on the staging. And so I decided to proceed in the most kerbal way. I decoupled, I opened the payload fairing, and I was hoping for the rocket to stay stable. It was not, but staging after stage after stage, I saw that the decoupler was indeed there. So I launched again, since it was unstable at that moment, and once I got into space, I realized that I did not have enough control, and it was because I forgot the reaction control thruster's propellant, so I did not put monopropellant. So once again, I launched, and this time, look at that, the struts were missing. The game took away the struts that were holding the boosters to the main core, and also the struts that were holding the payload to the second stage. Luckily enough, there was enough stiffness, there was enough rigidity in these parts to keep everything together. The rocket was spinning out also in the normal view and not just in the map view for some weird reason this time around, but I managed to get into orbit, and then when I was ready to plan the transfer maneuver to get to Dres, I did not manage to get an encounter. Why was it like that this time? Well, because I went more conservative with respect to what I did previously, and therefore the angle between Kirby and Dres was not the one of 86 degrees that I needed to do, it was a little bit bigger, so I had to create another warper, warp a little bit forwards, and then finally plan the maneuver and create a transfer. But the game wasn't letting me plan the maneuver, so I had to go back to the main menu and then come back and then perform the burn and then get into an orbit that was getting me to an encounter with Dres, obviously after changing the inclination as we are now used to do once we get into interplanetary space and once the indicator of the different inclination appears, which was not the case in Kerbal Space Program 1. You already could plan the maneuver while outside and you had a value of the difference of inclination, between the relative planes while you were in the Kerbin's sphere of influence. Here, no, you need to wait to be in interplanetary space. Getting to Dres and stopping the time warp really made my spacecraft wobble a lot, and that's obviously the reason for which I installed the struts that the game then did not decide to put. Here I overshot a little bit that burn, therefore my orbit was smaller than the one that I usually aim for, which is what I just explained for the previous docking attempt. Here also super wobbly the decoupling from the transfer stage, but luckily enough nothing exploded, and with some management, some changes of the orbit there, I got down to have an encounter that then could be used to create another maneuver plan, and for the next orbit have an interception, closest approach to the target, which was very small, in about hundreds of meters away. Yeah, 500 meters you can see there, so just time warp forwards and then perform inside of the rings as per usual in these last few docking attempts. Our rendezvous and approach to the Dres Ring Space Station, using this time the space tug that took us from Kerbin all the way to here. I brought lots of more hydrogen with respect to the one that we actually really needed, therefore I'm gonna use that then to refuel the space station so that it's gonna have enough delta V if someday we wanna transfer it somewhere, or also just simply to refuel the visiting crew vehicles or the crew landers that are gonna be brought up here to Dres in the next few episodes. And so coming in from this direction, this time I didn't wanna line up with a docking port at the top. The space station was in the perfect orientation, just slow down our relative velocity and then begin a slow approach towards the docking port here on the same side in which we are. Change the camera again to get inside the chase camera that moves around with our spacecraft and that lines up the keys of the reaction control thruster, and continue our approach. Ideally we want to be below 0.2 meters per second to make sure that we do not make any damage, and also to have enough room of safety if something were to start going wrong. And if anyone was asking, yeah, the Kraken is about to strike, and there you saw there was the space station that was all wobbling around, and then out of nowhere it decided that it wanted to tilt itself of I don't know how many, 45 degrees more or less, as I was about to dock to it. Therefore I had to make this rotation and translation maneuver to get closer to the docking port that I was targeting and towards which I was moving that then changed position, and we had the docking finally happening for this first habitative module, officially just habitative module and not the node module of the space station inside the rings of Dres, and so I could transfer some fuel from the fuel tank of the space tank to the space station. Then I wanted to go for the decoupling, but the decoupler put itself inside of the habitative module for some reason. It was not there when we built the module, and then I switched to the tug to deorbit it, maybe try to land it onto Dres, and obviously the Kraken had to attack this spacecraft too, and it started spinning all around, and so I said, you know what, I don't wanna mess with this stuff anymore. I had enough for today. The Kraken strikes, the rocket that had to be relaunched times and times for one problem or the other, and so with that I decided to conclude this second episode of the Dres Ring Space Station. Thanks so much for watching, it really means a lot. I hope that you may consider maybe subscribing if you found this content interesting, and for other KSP2 videos I wish you a good day. Catch you all next time. Bye bye.